This is a really big deal for Australia. At the moment, we only export 1 million head of cattle as it is. So if we export a whole another 1 million head of cattle to China on top of what we do now, that's a huge change for the beef industry.
Is there enough beef in Australia to actually supply China?
Well, that's going to be the really big issue at the moment, having had the drought right throughout Queensland and still the drought being there. We've run our numbers of cattle down enormously. We've had record killings through all the slaughterhouses. At the moment, they're all booked up because there's still drought cattle going through them. And also America is really short of beef, so beef prices have gone up in America, and they're trying to buy as much beef from Australia as they can as boxed meat rather than live cattle. So you've suddenly got record exports of live cattle to Indonesia, you've got record exports of beef to China and the US, and now we're saying another 1 million head of cattle to China on top of that eventually, but it certainly won't start straight away because we just haven't got the cattle numbers.
So that's going to push beef prices up, which I assume will mean that more farmers will be looking to put more cattle on the ground, but is there actually land for them to put cattle into pasture?
Well, that's the issue, because it takes about 2 to 3 years before you decide to expand your cattle numbers and breed up numbers, and you've got to have an end to the drought. So hopefully the wet will come in northern Australia soon, which will be the tropical part of Australia and the Territory, the Kimberley and across the Gulf. But you've still got huge amounts of Queensland where most of Australia's cattle are, like the Channel Country and central Queensland, which are in deep drought and have been for 3 years. And there are many properties there with no cattle left on them at all. So to try and restock and then to get going again to breed up to supply this trade will take you 2 or 3 years, because these cattle that are going out to China are sort of 18 months, 2 years, 3 years old. So you can't just sort of suddenly send them now.
So what kind of prices are we seeing for Australian beef in China?
Australian beef is only really just sort of going to China now as box beef. We've had a new abattoir open up in Northern Territory at Darwin just in the last few weeks, and their prime market is to send boxes of meat to China. And they particularly want often our secondary cuts, which suit their hot pot style cooking. So they're things that we might call the less prime cuts of steak. They're actually more things that come from the ribs, and they go as cuts and thin slices, and that suits their style of cooking. So we're seeing a lot more of that sort of beef go to China, but the market is really endless, particularly as their incomes go up and we can supply more beef and they want to eat more meat.
And so that's beef, but I assume that this is sort of the first part of a huge amount of meat that's going to go towards China. Barnaby Joyce was saying they'll take everything from sheep to goat. I mean, is this really just the start of a huge export of live meat to China from Australia?
Yes, but we have to realise that we're not the only people with animals. I mean, there's countries like India are the biggest exporters of meat in the world. Brazil is a big exporter. There's often quite a lot of detailed reasons why some of those countries can't get access into China because of various non-tariff trade barriers, diseases, things like that. So we are very well placed because Australia has such a great reputation for clean, green meat. We are free of foot and mouth disease. One of the reasons we haven't sold live cattle before as from eating meat is because cattle from northern Australia have the blue tongue virus, and that has been a threat to seen as a threat to the Chinese sheep flock. Whether it is or not is a matter for debate, but so that's the reason we will actually see this live cattle trade start up. Will be some restrictions on it about what times of year cattle can come from northern Australia, and other times they'll be coming from southern Australia. So there's still a few details to be worked out about how practically it will work. But the big issue is at the moment, do we actually have the cattle to provide them with?
So what's China's reputation though for handling live animals? Because you wouldn't want to see a repeat of what happened in Indonesia, would you?
No, very much, and that's going to be a crucial issue. At the moment, the responsibility rests with the exporters. Once they say they will export cattle to China, it's up to them to go and actually make sure they have the supply chain cleared right through to Australian standards. So they have to make sure the feedlots that the cattle go into when they get off the ships in China are up to Australian standards, and also the abattoirs.
Will they enforce that?
Well, yes. I mean, there are auditors who do this, so that's what the chain is, and it's up to the Australian, government to make sure it happens, and the actual Australian people. But the issue really will be how good the abattoirs are, and there are terrifically good abattoirs and modern abattoirs in China in some parts. In other parts, they're obviously very backward as well. China's a huge country, and it depends which part you're going to. But there's no doubt there are a lot of abattoirs in China, and many have been built in the last few years as red meat the consumption has risen. So, I mean, as long as you pick your right abattoirs, and presumably that's where the supply chain will be focused, there's no reason for us to see a repeat of cruelty or anything like that happening to the cattle.
And finally, do you see a point where perhaps a lot of those regional towns which have been losing a lot of people because there's been no work there might actually start to turn around because there's more industries available around, say, the beef industry?
There's been a huge change in beef prices very quickly. Just in, I think it was about March, April this year, we were selling cattle for about $1.50 a kilo, and now they're getting over $2.50 to $3 quite soon. I mean, that's a massive change, and for a lot of cattlemen who have been broke, who haven't got any stock left, who've actually been foreclosed on by banks, both because of drought and not getting any profits from the red meat prices, this potentially is a massive turnaround for the industry. If they can take advantage of it. But unfortunately, probably some of the people who've already gone off the land won't be able to. But companies who are poised, some of the big cattle companies who are up there increasing cattle numbers and who are really going to be the ones who take the advantage of this.
Sue Neils, thanks very much.
Thank you.